Hello and welcome to TidyX episode 150. Hey, TidyX is a
Wow.
screencast where we go through and explain how our code works. My name's Ellis Hughes.
And my name is Patrick Ward. Thanks for joining us for 150 episodes. We've been doing this pretty consistently for a few
Just
years
over
now,
three
and
years. Yeah.
and that's awesome. And so we appreciate everybody who's joined along. And if you have questions or comments about any episode, you can always like and subscribe on the YouTube channel, and we'll get back to you and maybe make one of your questions a upcoming episode. Additionally, through the 150 episodes, if you feel like we've in some way positively impacted your work, we do have a Patreon page. We're super appreciative of any donation that you'd like to make to support our work.
Mm-hmm.
That said, we're going to jump into episode 150. We've been working through Shiny for user-defined model building purposes, and we started with a basic linear regression. We then moved to allowing the user to select a data set and select the amount of data that's allocated to the training set. And one of the things that we noticed was that when we allowed the user to select the outcome variable and the predictors, we weren't subsetting out the outcome variable from the predictor variable. So it was possible, for example, to have an outcome variable as MPG and then a predictor variable as MPG. We're going to correct that today in this episode before we then move on to give some other options for selecting different model types and things like that. So
More complicated
that's
stuff.
kind
Yeah.
of that's kind of the progression that we're going on. So Ellis has today's one of two. We have two different options for you. Ellis has one of two options that we're going to work through today. And you can see MPG has been selected as an outcome variable, but is no longer selectable as a predictor variable. Similarly, if you were to change MPG to like weight or something like that, so change it to another cylinders, great. All of a sudden, we're back at the beginning. We build a regression model. Now, cylinder is no longer an option. Again, that's one of two options that we are providing today. So let's jump into the code for option one, and then we'll show option two, and we'll go through that code. The good news is most of the code for this has not changed. We're kind of stepping this up as we go over the past 3 weeks. So our user interface is totally the same. So if you want to know kind of the nuts and bolts of how the user interface was defined and developed, jump back to episode 148. That's where we started this entire madness.
Mm-hmm. So this is pretty straightforward here. This hasn't changed. You upload this as a file input. You have two select inputs here, which are those two selection drop downs that we were working with there, and then a slider input that we talked about last week. Main panel hasn't changed as well. We have a tab set panel with the 3 different entries there. Here we're showing the model outputs, and then here's the 2 tabs showing your test and train splits. Again, go into a lot more detail in the last episode here. But let's step through how you could do this simple simple update to the server that we were using beforehand, but this time it prevents the user from accidentally selecting a predictor variable and an outcome variable that are the same thing, because we know that's no good. That's not actually going to lead to a very good model. Patrick, do you want to take us through this one?
Yeah, so server is starting out there. It's the same server information. We have input, output, and session. The input data set, again, jump back to episode 148. We talk about how this works and why it works. So we're not going to go into it today. The new stuff is right here. We've used observe event before. Basically, what observe event is doing is it's watching and it's waiting for the user to do something so that it can do something and then give some sort of outcome to what the user sees. So here, the observe event is that we've uploaded a bunch of data. So we've allowed the user to input their CSV file. They upload that in, and the observe event says, hey, someone has input data. What do you want me to do? And so the first thing we're doing is we're saying, hey, update the select input, the one that's called yvar. So we want to give the user some options to select dependent variables. So they're going to select that outcome variable. The choices that they get are the column names from the input data set. Oh, and by the way, we're just going to have selected, this is the default, the first column. Because we're allowing people to upload whatever data they want, we don't know what outcome variable people would want to kind of like be directed to. So we're just going to default to the first option within that string of column names. Remember, column names is going to pull a vector. And so we're just using some vector notation with the brackets there to say, give me the first element in that vector of column names. Okay, the next observe event has to be for the X variables, for the independent variables. So again, the observe event says, did someone load any data? Yes, they did. What would you like me to do? It has a second option in here, though. It says, when there's some input data and once they've selected a yvar. Now we have yvar automatically defaulted to the first row, so that's not going to be a problem. It's always going to be selected. There's always going to be something there when they start out. We're going to update that select input for the X variables by saying, hey, input ID is X variables. The choices, though, are going to be the difference between that vector of column names for the data that they've uploaded and whatever the heck they selected for that yvar. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to subset out the y variable that's been selected and give the rest of the column names as the actual input options for the X variables. After that, nothing changes. If we scroll down, we're going to see a bunch of commented out stuff that Ellis is going to go through next. That's option 2. But this is all everything from episode 149. We're splitting out our training data set. We're fitting a model to that training data set. And then we're making our out of sample predictions on the test set. And then we're returning those predictions in the forms of plots and the mean absolute error of that out of sample. And then we have the second tabs, the second and third tabs, which show which data was randomly split to the training set and which data was randomly split to the test set. So if we run this, we're going to get that first Shiny app that we saw right at the start. And again, episode 149 goes through the nuts and bolts of most of this stuff. The only thing that's different is the way in which we observe the event in order to ensure that, for example, MPG is no longer in the predictor set. And now we can select. And here's the key. Here's what Ellis is going to go. If you change this, and I kind of like this, if you change it, it goes back to an empty regression model. So now you have to refit or repick your predictor variables. I like that because for me, I'm thinking, well, why would anyone assume that the same predictor variable should work for a different dependent variable, for a different outcome variable? So I like that it resets because it makes you think hard about what you put into the model. But for your user, they might want to have different dependent variables, but they might want to have the same predictor variables. And Ellis is going to show how we can retain those and ensure that the user knows that they're being retained and one of the dependent variable is changing.
Yep. So let's hop into that one. Cool. So we're going to scroll up a little bit here. Back to the old code, we're going to comment out the second portion of the observe events here, which is the one that's updating the xvars. We're only going to set it up so that when we update the yvar, it'll impact the xvar selection. We're not setting it up the other way around so that it sends information to update the yvar selection. We're not going to create a loop there. So it's one directional, which makes this process a little bit easier to handle code-wise and kind of think about, because otherwise you end up with needing a lot of states and information. This one's a little bit simpler. So let's uncomment this. So basically what we've got going on here is a little bit more complicated of an observe event, and we have some information being stored here. So let's start off with this piece here. So this is, we're creating a reactive val. So a reactive val will update, it behaves like a reactive in the sense of you reference it later on as a function, very similarly to other reactives. However, it gets assigned values explicitly. It doesn't automatically update as a reactive might when other elements update. And so what we're going to do is, this actually kind of behaves very similarly to a reactive, but I wanted to reference it like this in case we do more complicated stuff in the future, where we create an observe event. It's looking at input xvars. So anytime input xvars updates, it will update the xvars selected reactive val with that same vector. And so it's relatively simple here in this situation. It's a very one-to-one relationship, but oftentimes you can create more complicated relationships with this. If we were updating both the xvar and the yvar at the same time to try to make them be to talk to one another, we do something along these lines. Next, again, we have that observe event. It's looking for one of two changes, either the input data set updates or the input yvar updates. So if either one of these is triggered, it'll trigger this line of this code over here. What's happening here is first it's going to go, hey, if this input xvar or yvar has or is existing in historically what was one of the xvars selected, I want to notify the user of what's going on here. And so we're going to use the show toast function. We haven't talked about toasts before, but they're the little pop-ups that happen on your web pages with like information in it, just to let you know kind of where things are at, if something's running or some other information. And so that's from the Shiny Widgets package. So you may have noticed at the very top of our code, we have the library Shiny Widgets. Toast has several different arguments here. So it has a title. And so here we're going, hey, you dropped a predictor. In the text, we're going to explicitly tell you which of those predictor variables you've then dropped by saying, hey, I removed the predictor input yvar from the prediction var as it's now an outcome variable, just to give them context and knowledge about what's going on. The type of toast that we're going to be showing is a warning. There's several different types of toasts. And it just kind of has to do with the coloring. So you might see like a green one pop up and that's success, or a blue one and that's information. So warning is going to be like an orange color. And then the position is where the toast is going to appear. Here I want it to be on the top and to the right. So top end. You can have it show up in the very top. You can have it pop up in the very middle. On the bottom right is bottom end, I believe. And then the start has to do with, I believe it's lined up on the left. But the idea is I just like, hey, FYI, this happened, because I wanted to warn the user that I changed something that they may not have expected. Mm-hmm. Then we get into our update select input. For the most part, this is pretty similar. So we have our session. The ID that we're changing is xvars. The label is not changing. The choices are the same as we're updating it just as before. We're saying, hey, we're not going to allow you to select a yvar or the yvar that's currently selected as one of the predictor variables. But this time we're passing selected. And so this is going to tell it to reserve or make sure that these are the variables that are selected after we update. So it doesn't end up with a cascade of changes. And so in this case, we're going to do a set diff on what were the originally selected variables, which is why we need to be referencing it as a reactive val. And we're going to set diff from input yvar, so it'll remove it. And so what's going to happen here is then the selected variables xvars is going to be the original set minus the yvar if it was part of that. That'll then update this piece. The input xvars will update, and then xvars selected will update to reflect only the set of variables that doesn't include yvar. And so you can see this can get a little bit complicated, and thinking about cascades of knowledge in Shiny apps can get a little silly and a little brain twisty. But in this situation, at least it's relatively linear. So let's see how this one behaves. So first, I'm actually going to move us to the bottom left. We're going to browse. We're going to update or upload empty cars again. Again, of course, MPG gets selected here. But now I'm going to, select a whole variety of predictor variables. Kind of look at my code or results here going, okay, cool, I like this. But actually, I'm curious how horsepower is compared to those variables. Does that change? I mean, I guess you might expect it to, but maybe you have two different predictor or outcome variables that you're interested in that are relatively similar. But one predicts the other. So let's update the horsepower. As you can see, we had this pop up here that said, hey, horsepower was a predictor variable. I've now dropped that. And now predictor variable or horsepower is removed from this column, but MPG didn't get added in, which is why we don't have that kind of loop going on there. But we were able to update that. We can, of course, keep on clicking through. We removed sil from the predictor variable because now it's an outcome variable. And so it gives like a little bit more information to your user about what's going on, not just resetting everything anytime they select a new variable, which I totally understand where Patrick's coming from in the sense of, realistically, they are separate values that you're predicting, but there might be use cases for either or where you do want to just clear it out and not let them continue. But there also could be cases where if you're working on a form and they update a variable or a piece up above that does impact down below to change the selections, you don't want to completely remove it.
Mhm.
Here we're talking about linear regression, but I guess I'm talking more generally about different applications of this
Mhm.
logic flow. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's how you can uh, allow or update your Shiny app so that you don't accidentally select the same outcome variable and predictor variable in your regressions.
Yeah. Awesome. Two options, both complete the same task. And that's the third installment of Shiny model building. And I guess if you have questions or comments, let us know, but we'll progress on in the coming weeks and add more features and options in that left sidebar panel that allow the user to specify other things.
Yes. Thank you all so much for joining us for 150 episodes of TidyX. I've loved doing it over the last 3 years, and I hope you've enjoyed it throughout this process. As always, my name's Ellis Hughes, and you can find me on various social media sites at Ellis_Hughes.
And my name's Patrick Ward. You can find me on Twitter at OSPPatrick. Tidy_explained is where we both live on Twitter via this screencast handle. Tidy.explained@gmail.com is where you could email us, but liking and subscribing, as we've said, is the best way to get in touch with us on that YouTube channel. Tell your friends. And if you enjoyed our work and you feel like it's impacted you over these last 150 episodes and you'd like to donate to us, we do have a Patreon page. We're always very thankful. Other than that, that is episode 150, a milestone episode.
Exactly. Thank you all so much, and keep on exploring your world.